Welcome to Ginger Snapshots. Hey, this week I want to talk to you about ambient light and strobe lighting, two light sources, and how they are actually controlled. One of the biggest moments I had in photography was understanding that aperture controls the strobe lighting while the ambient light is controlled by its shutter speed. So let's go dive into that. So what is ambient light first? Ambient light is anything in the atmosphere. Right now this is ambient light. I am being lit ambient light. I do have a model light that's on. I don't have my normal regular light that I usually have on me. I have a constant light that I have for videos. I had to move it out of the studio for a shoot that I was doing this week. And so it's kind of getting dark outside, and so really the only light I have is this model light coming on me, and then anything that the camera's pulling in from the ISO. Because I do have the ISO set at automatic. So if I had a table lamp right here, and that's putting out light, that's still part of the ambient light because it's still not light that is controlling the camera. Outside on a bright sunny day, that is ambient light. The light that is in the atmosphere around you is ambient light, natural light. Then there's the strobe, which is not natural light, it's not in the atmosphere, and a strobe or a flash only goes off in a flash when the shutter speed is hit. It is, timed to go off. So those are two different light sources. But the thing that I found really interesting, when you first start out, let me just do a quick little study of the exposure triangle. So when you first start out on manual mode, you learn to use that exposure triangle, aperture, shutter speed, and ISO. So the ISO is really pulling in artificial light to make up for it. In previous videos I've talked about using my Panasonic G9 and it being a micro four thirds camera and it not pulling enough light in from the sensor. So the sensor size, there's so many things that play into it. But the three settings are the biggest things you're going to work with after you've decided your sensor size. So the sensor size allows more light in it. My Sony is a full frame and it allows more light in. So the aperture is the iris of the lens, and that's how much light how big that's open. So your camera lens has an opening, and how much it opens wide open is allowing a lot of light. And the shutter speed is how quick is that shutter open. If you're shooting in something in 1/800th of a second, just real quick. That's great for like sports photography. You want to have something that's allows for the shutter to be open longer to capture the image, but it's also allowing more light in it. So, that's just a lot that you're going to learn when you're first shooting in manual mode. But it's so important. But beyond that, after you learn that, you can get your camera and you're out there using it. Like for me, I was out there using it in manual mode, trying to learn every little aspect I could about taking pictures. I take a picture of my beautiful red rose and it's just in focus. That's just everything I want, but it looks like it's dark around it. And probably I did not understand that when I first took that, until later on when I understood this idea of the aperture and shutter speed controlling it. There's also things like inverse square law. So let me talk about that a little bit first. So inverse square law is a law of light, really, basically, and do a search on it. You can find really good videos. One's better than I could probably make, where they're taking a picture of the light and the person, and basically what it's showing you, like a lot of videos will show you, is how much it's the idea of how much light is hitting the person, how close they are to the light, and how far they are from the light, and how much light falls off from them and how soon it falls off. It's just really interesting, and that affects a lot in photography as well. So you've got your exposure triangle, and then you've got your light sources. So understanding that, really, you can do so much with it. Even in the studio, if I have one light and I have my white wall and that's all I have, I can literally create so many different looks depending on how I control that light, what my settings are. Even if I keep my shutter speed and my aperture the exact same, and then what I do is I have maybe the light and the person real close to the wall, and I take that picture, that wall's still going to kind of look white. But as I pull that person, the light and the person away from that white wall begins to look gray. and almost black. You could almost really seriously have a white background and make it look black. That is especially true, more so I guess I should say, with gray. That is why it is like the first color I'm going to use. If somebody's going to pick a color for headshot, it's the easiest to shoot with, because you know, it just stays gray, and really even with gray, you can pull that person further away from the background and not light that background, and you do have a black background. So there's just interesting things like that. Backlighting comes into play. Backlighting is really essentially canceling out ambient light, because all of the light with a backlit image, not like this one, and what I shoot here is with a backlight. I have what I have in my studio, and I think I've shown this even in the last video I did, but the strobe light that hits my white wall bounces off and then hits the curtain, and that light comes from that curtain. And so like if I'm standing behind that white curtain to my left, then that is going to cancel out that ambient light, and that whole light behind me is just strobe light. There is no natural light anymore. And then I have the choice from there to how much light or strobe I want to put on the person. With maternity, it creates a beautiful silhouette, and you could actually just cancel out the ambient light behind the person and shoot that. And then when you're shooting at the person, it's the ambient light is what you see, sort of, you know, because that light is behind them, and it's creating a beautiful silhouette. So I believe I saw this on a video first, and that was where I was like, wait a minute, what did you say? And you know, like to this day I still have it on my iPad. I don't know if I'm going to share it with somebody or why I haven't done anything with it, but I have all kinds of notes, you know, explaining what is shutter speed, and you know, how fast should the shutter speed be if you're shooting kids running around, or you know, things like that. I'm fortunate that most of the people that I shoot, except for those cake smashes with those toddlers that crawl all over the place, most of the time my shutter speed can be very low, because I'm shooting newborns that are not very fast, and headshots, things like that, adult portraits. But then when you do get into the children, you're going to have to raise it. But I would study those things. But what's interesting is that you can take a picture of someone, and in that picture you're taking everything's the same, and you just change one setting, and it changes the picture completely. So you could take a picture of me, I'm standing outside and the trees are behind me, and you got the strobe light on me, and you take that picture, and I'm real well lit, and maybe the shutter speed is at 1/1000th of a second, and it looks like it's completely dark behind me. And then you change that setting to maybe be 1/100th of a second. All of a sudden it's like I'm lit and it's daylight out. So that's my main thing for today, is you changing your shutter speed. How fast that, you know, shutter is open affects the background, but it does not affect the subject. How does that even work? That's why I just chose to say 2 light sources, because it's very interesting that I can put a strobe light on me and I change the aperture, and that's what is changing. You know, in his studio, it's all going to still matter, but predominantly that aperture is what is controlling me, and that's what is interesting. Now you change your ISO settings, that's going to change it. And for me, when I'm in the studio, changing the power of my light. I have this light that I have on me it's just that's a light bulb, so you can't really see the strobe that it has, the power that it puts out. But this one here is a 400 watt, and that was just too much power for my newborn pictures, and so I had to actually have bought a 8200 Pro from Godox, and that is what I use for my newborns, because I can actually turn the power down to 132, you know, just a lot less power than what I would normally. And so the power of the light, you know, that's going to, like for outside at noon, the power of the sun is so intense, and most photographers will. And like tomorrow I have a shoot at the Nature Center, and it's going to be at sunset because the light is more easily controlled and it's not so harsh. So there's a lot of things that play into it, and you're always, I don't think that you can ever be in photography unless you want to do automatic mode and that's all you ever want to do. You're always going to be working with those three things. And even when you're in automatic mode, your camera's doing the work for you because it's always thinking. And I'll tell you, when I'm outside shooting, I will have my ISO set at automatic. You know, just let the camera decide. I decide what I want the shutter speed to be based on how fast my subject is or the amount of light, you know, if it's bright sunny day, whatever, and my aperture to how much I want to have in focus, how much I want bokeh I want, or how much clarity I want, how many people I'm shooting. So then a lot of times, like if I'm shooting outside and I come back in the studio and I have that ISO set at 100, I mean at automatic, I come in here and my camera, this is what your camera is doing. My camera is reading to say, this is what the light is in the room. Like right now, it would take a picture and it would do the reading according to what the ambient light is. So if the ambient light, it would say, oh, well, the ambient, I need to add 1000 ISO. And so then it would take that picture to be that, and then I do this so much on my first shot, it's like, and it's overblown because it's pulling in both that ISO and the strobe light. And so your camera will read, that's what it reads according to the ambient light. So when I'm in the studio, I have to say, this is what it's going to be, because you don't know, the camera doesn't know the strobe is going to go off, basically. How much light, it doesn't know how much light or how much power that light's going to bring in. And so then it's double doing it. So then I have it set to an automatic, to 100. And that's what I shoot in here. But shooting in here is not at like that whole shutter speed and aperture thing. That setting is probably going to be affected more so outside than in here, because I shoot so close to the wall. Like, see, I can touch my wall. So your shutter speed and your aperture, that law is still working, but because of the close proximity of both me and the wall to the light, it's not going to be as affected as much. But I will show you these examples that I've taken here with this, my little doll here. We take a picture in here in the same condition and do that. Okay, so here is two different pictures with everything is exactly the same except for the shutter speed is increased for the second picture. So you can just see the difference there, that how it did darken the background, and it's just kind of to illustrate the whole point. You can also notice that this picture is much more brighter white because the white balances for the strobe, or I should say, the strobe light is much cooler than the light that is on me, and which is the model light. In here, when I'm taking pictures with the lights on, overhead lights, I do that so that the parents or the person coming in for the studio is not sitting in the dark. But my settings on my camera are such that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. They're like, oh, aren't you going to have shadows? Like when I take a picture of my studio, just standing back, and I take a picture of my studio with the lights on overhead, there's so many shadows on the wall because I have, 7 beams up here, 8 beams. Beams from the ceiling, and that casts down a lot of light. But when I'm taking pictures, that absolutely is irrelevant because I have my strobe lighting set to where that it overpowers any ambient light. And so that's just really important to me that I control that, because I take away those shadows and I control where those shadows are, and because I couldn't do it in here with these beams. I love them, they're beautiful in my studio, but essentially they create a lot of shadows. So I think that's the gist of what I wanted to share with you today, just talking about understanding light, that it is the foundation of photography, and if you can't understand that light, then you're just not going to be very successful. You have to get that down, and then once the biggest first thing you do is that exposure triangle, and then there's so many things that play into it that you're always learning. And I think that's what to me, and maybe if you're not a non-photographer, I have a friend that she wanted to take pictures of her products that she's selling. She doesn't want to learn how to do photography. She just wants to be able to take a picture of her product. So I went over and I said, this is what you need to change and this is what you need to do. And now she can take those pictures and she doesn't want to learn the rest of it. But for me, I love learning this, and it's a challenge. And you know, going outside, and there are people that do natural light photography in the studio, and that's a challenge to them. And we all have different things. And so also don't forget, I always say, you know, you want to shoot with the right angle of light, because if you have you take a flashlight and you hold it under you at a campsite, what do? That's like a ghost story telling. That's ghoul lighting. And so when you're in outside or you're in the studio, you want to have the light coming down on the person, on their head, you know, not up like that. And here's my God shot. I'm starting to add this to my blogs on my website to tell my photography, and then I tell my God shot for it, or my Ginger's breadcrumb is what I call it sometimes. It's just a breadcrumb. But Jesus is that strobe light, and he will always overpower us as the ambient light. So that's what is just fascinating. So I'm taking a picture, and I take that picture, and that strobe light, it just can completely make the whole room look dark, but me look well lit. Or it just completely, it doesn't even matter. That's my God shot, that Jesus is that strobe light that overpowers the ambient light. We are the ambient light. We still produce light, and we still are relevant. But Jesus always overpowers. His light is greater than ours. So there you go. So you've learned a God shot, and you've learned about light sources, ambient and strobe lighting. Happy shooting. So I see you next time. Don't forget, hit like and subscribe. See you next time. Bye-bye.